Welcome to another Domo Lunch and Learn, and this one is what we like to say in the business. This is a hot one. This is a little bit, I want to do a little bit of a boxing announcer voice, I think, for the intro on this, Andrea. So this idea of coming up with a Magic ETL versus the Contenders. So we're really excited to announce this session today. This will be a very use-case-centric live stream. It is a heavyweight bout between the Magic ETL tool, which will take on other data transformation tools as contenders. So we'll talk about SQL data flows, Adrenaline data flows, and Dataset Views. Who will win out today? No one knows, but you want to stick around to find out. As always, I'm joined by my good friends from Domo, Andrea Henderson, Nick, Matt, and Dan. Really appreciate you guys joining us. Lots of ways that folks can use all of these tools, but this is a little bit of a match. We're going to talk a little bit about how these compete with each other and how best you might use each one for your very specific use case. So Andrea, thank you very much for grabbing the team and getting them together for this exciting Lunch and Learn live stream on a Tuesday.
Great. Thanks, Eddie. Excited to be back here again and to bring to you a few of my colleagues. As part of my role here, I lead a SME team internally who are focused on data pipelines and data platform in general. So Nick, Matt, Dan are all part of the team with me. We're excited to come and talk to you guys about Magic ETL. Anybody who's spoken with me knows that I will push Magic as kind of your first choice data transformation tool within Domo. However, there are some use cases in which the other transformation tools have a very solid case. So today we are going to kick it off by talking about the reigning champion Magic, the reasons why you use Magic, and then each of us have kind of our own little tool that we are going to be showing you a use case for where that tool may be preferable to Magic. So I'll kick it over to Nick, who's repping for Magic today.
All right, so Magic ETL, it's the reigning champ. It's our flagship ETL product at Domo. So I'll just get into why we consider it to be the best option in most use cases. And I started out my journey in Domo as a customer, and now I'm an employee. But over time, I've come to use it for over 99% of my use cases. So one of the biggest ones is it's ease of use, right? It's we like to say it hits like a heavyweight, moves like a feather. It's very approachable. So whether you're a business user who's just getting used to beast modes at the visualization layer, or a data analyst who likes to get into the full ETL logic and writing formulas, things like that, it's really designed for everyone. So you can use it purely no code, just use the tiles, right? You can throw in some formula tiles and start going low code with it. And along with the ease of use just is the readability of the ETL once you lay it out. If you think about SQL, right, it's just code block after code block in a long chain. But because you're able to lay out your tiles, arrange them, group them, and cluster them into like functions, and then you have a flow of logic left to right, top and bottom, how you arrange your canvas, and you can use colors going between those lines. So at the end of it, if you've sort of designed it right, it becomes very readable, right? You can pick it up and understand other people's ETLs much quicker than other data flow types. You always got the option of labeling things, adding notes onto it, so it becomes very easy to just pass it on to someone or inherit someone else's data flows. Magic ETL is pretty modular. Rather than writing chunks of code, you have individual tiles, and while it might take a bit longer to get it going and setting up more tiles than you're used to, at the end of it, once you've sort of got your tile structure built, it is reusable. You can copy logic and paste it within the same data flow, or you can actually take that and paste it into other data flows. It's a handy tip to keep in mind. So if, for example, you figured out, a set of 10 tiles which does something very repeatable, and you're going to do it, if let's say marketing, right, you're going to do it for multiple channels of data coming in, you can just copy between those and reuse that code. The other benefit of having things broken out in more tiles is more detailed debugging. So if you've looked at the run logs, if you click it, right, you can actually see tile by tile how things are running, the row counts and the time it's taken. And especially if you're doing things like joins and appends, if you have a blown join, right, this is a really good place to catch it and get much more detailed about it. Magic ETL is very flexible, so you got, I think, about 20-ish tiles in there to do your no-code ETL transforms. So a really powerful one is pivot, unpivot. I've done a fair amount of SQL in my life, but I still struggle to do pivot and unpivot gracefully in SQL. It is painless in Magic ETL. That's one of the big benefits. And then formula tiles, beast mode plus plus in a way. If you're familiar with Excel and SQL, it gets you really, really far along the track of, if you're coming from SQL and using Magic ETL. So that's where the sort of the heavyweight comes in, right? It can pretty much do anything you throw at it. You might have to sort of test yourself some preconceived notions about, well, can I do this outside of SQL? But it more likely than not, you can do it. And then it can handle small and large data sets, right? It's very, very quick, can run in seconds for small ones, but it's pretty efficient, even if you get into hundreds of millions of rows, and you can handle that pretty well. Some special skills for Magic ETL, so you can do quite a fair bit of data science with our data science add-ons. As scripting capabilities, if you want to do Python and R, you can add those tiles and really get some custom code in there as well. In terms of performance, it is our flagship product, and it is tuned under the hood a lot. It's very, very fast for doing the transforms it does versus the other ETLs, and it gets a lot of investment, so it's always improving. In terms of performance, it's very stable and robust, right? So it's very predictable when you have a ETL logic built, it's going to run within a very tight time frame repeatedly. Some of the other ones might be a little unpredictable. Streaming is a big performance advantage for Magic ETL. And by this, we mean it handles loads in parallel, right? It'll start processing data and taking data all the way through to the output as quick as it can. It doesn't need to wait for everything to be loaded. So for example, here's a data flow with a couple inputs here, the output down here, and you've got some group bys in the middle, some joins happening in the middle, right? So I'm just taking a couple snapshots every few minutes. It starts reading at the top. It's done with pieces here, but it's already starting to write output at the bottom, right? Even if it hasn't finished reading at the top. And that's what really lets it just churn through data very, very quickly. It's also got smart ingestion, so if nothing has changed in the input rows, Magic ETL is going to skip the run, save you that time. If you are doing any subset of columns or subset of rows, so a select tile or a filtered tile right after the input tile, Magic ETL is actually going to smartly not ingest any data it doesn't need to, and it's going to save you that, that input time. And then partition support, this is a really, really powerful new feature that's come out. So subset processing, right? Things that would take tens of hours to run can literally run in single-digit minutes now if you're just processing the exact partitions that you need to partition. So if you haven't explored that, definitely check that out. And then in terms of, integration, it is compatible with a lot of other Domo features where other ETL tools aren't. So if you're using federated or virtual data sets as part of Domo Everywhere or Sandbox, or even just direct federating data inputs from other cloud sources, you can use them in Magic ETL. You can also write back data right from the data flow to other platforms outside of Domo if needed. And as part of Cloud Amplifier that's coming up, it lets you input and output right to other data platforms. And then a couple interesting did you know facts. So with Magic ETL, you may not know that you can actually cast data coming in. So right on the input tile, if you pop open the data handling, right, you can change data types for specific columns, and you can set rules what to do if something doesn't fit. Do you null it out? Do you error it? Things like that. You can also cast data in formula tiles. So some interesting ones are try-cast. So if you have, this is a use case where I have just columns and values in a very tall data set and different number or different data types in the same thing, right? I can use try-cast on subsets of this data set and just make sure that if I expect a number to be in there, I only have numbers. If it doesn't find it, it's going to null it out. So handy tool in some use cases. And then there's Dynacast as well, which you can grab a data type from another column and cast the first column. Another interesting use case using some formula tiles. If you've ever done string handling, all kinds of fun when you get weird characters coming in. So we have some formulas to detect those individual characters, invisible separators. There's a hyphen, which all of these looks the same in a string, but they're actually different types. And once you know exactly what character's coming in, you can swap it out using, you can use regex to get rid of it, or you can actually use some built-in functions to just clean up the string coming in. All right, so that's Magic for you.
Great, thanks, Nick. So that was our champion, Magic. Next, first up, round one, we have Adrenaline Data Flows. Matt, take it away.
All right, hey everybody, thanks for joining today. I'm going to present here. Let me just get slides. Sorry, let me just prevent. Share the screen. So here we go. You guys can all see my screen. Sorry. So I'll just start out with the tail of the tape. And so this is our first comparison, our first battle against the champion, Magic. This is just kind of the tail of the tape in regards to what you should do if you're considering using Adrenaline, right? So this data.
Hey Matt, yeah. I don't mean to stop you. You are actually just sharing the PowerPoint presenter screen.
Oh,
so I'm going to switch that over to full screen.
Yeah,
PowerPoint.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No problem. This is why we do it live. I love the meme, the live meme. So what happens when you go live here? Again, very informal. No worries.
There you go.
Looks like we've got a full screen now. So
we got a full screen now. Great. Okay, great. Sorry about that, everybody. So yeah. So in this case, you can see that our tail of tape is based off of some criteria that you should use when you're considering Magic versus Adrenaline. The first one being just massive data sets. It's really built for 300 million and above rows of data. That's what it's designed to do. It's designed to be optimized for those really, really large data sets. The current level of user that's going to use this is somebody that's a little bit more advanced in SQL technology. So it's going to use SQL language to write those transformations, to build those pipelines. The goal of Adrenaline is really just reduction in summary, right? It just gives you that ability to reduce really, really large data sets down to smaller data sets so that you can render them. So if you're using products like Domo Everywhere, where you're sharing that, or you're using really, really large data sets that span over years and you want to summarize those down so that your users can render their charts and graphs faster, that is really what Adrenaline is built for. And it's lightning fast. It's built on our proprietary database, so it's extremely smart, and it's cached so that it moves quickly from result set to end set. So here's kind of our look at Adrenaline itself. Again, if you're sharing data to clients, if you're sharing data through APIs, if you're sharing data through products like Domo Everywhere, it's great to really reduce those timeouts if you're dealing with really, really large data sets. So that's where Adrenaline can come in and allow you to summarize and reduce those data sets down into sizes that are going to be efficient and move quickly through the data for your end user. Again, built for deeper types of analysis. Maybe year over year, we constantly have these conversations about, I need more than 5 years of data. I need 10 years of data. I need 20 years of data. This allows you to scan over those big, large data sets that are filling that and produce an end result with current information. So, if you're looking at date series type of information and you want to go back to 10 years, but you also want to include current level data, this is a great tool to do that and to allow you to reduce those into manageable sizes that are going to move quickly for drilling and for optimizing data sets moving out to end users. There's a lot of built-in functionality that's built into Adrenaline in regards to the functions. So a lot of math, date, string functions, as well as some of our analytic functions, lags, partition over, and order by, so that you can do some of the things that you want to do to get those results out to the end user and keep those sets small. So like many of our other ETL tools, those built-in functions are there and allow you to get to an end result with less code and less interactions through that. Again, skill sets really around advanced analysts and SQL-based users. This is not somebody that you're going to just drop in for their very first juncture. That's where Magic is a star. But where we're a star is when it comes to these really large sets and you need to write some complex queries to get to where it is. That's where Adrenaline comes. The performance, and I'll show you that quickly. The performance is about 1/10 of the time that it would take you to process most data sets. So I think in the sample that I have, the sample that I produced in a Magic ETL run, it was around the 20-minute mark. And with Adrenaline, it was around the 30-second mark. So it depends on what you're doing and how many fields, obviously, in the width. But you can see there's huge gains with doing that. When is it not the right tool? I think that's important to state out here as well. Is, if you're looking to do row by row transformation, Adrenaline is not your tool. It's not really designed for that. It is fast, but it's just not designed for it. It's designed for reduction and aggregations of data. That's really where you'll see the most benefit out of that. And it's also just not built for small data sets, right? Most of the time when you're dealing in the 300 million to 500 million, even up to 500 million, just normal data flows like Magic and cards processing those will work just fine and give you the extended results that you're looking for. Again, it has some of that built-in functionality that all of our ETLs see with built-in scheduling based on whether you want to run it on a schedule or you want to run it on an update. This is nice if you have nightly data coming in. And again, my use case is you're looking at 10 or 20 years worth of data and you want to compare the current days. So as it's moving forward to let you know where you're headed, you can just be setting that data in to come in daily and then triggering the Adrenaline flow to run. There's utilization optimization that's built into it, into this process as well. So as it looks through there, it optimizes what those queries should look like to the back end and deliver that in a quicker fashion as it learns and goes through those data sets. So yeah, these are really the benefits and the features that are from an Adrenaline standpoint, comparing to a Magic standpoint. And I'll just show you briefly here. I'm going to stop sharing and share a different screen to you. So 1 second here. And if a lot of you are not familiar with our ETL tool, then I'll show you that. But basically, I've created a couple of different flows. This is just a standard flow that is using Magic ETL to process the data. One entry set that had 600 million rows that came in and processed. And you can see it ran for about 20 minutes. This 600 row was split into 2 different summary data sets to produce an end result. So I just did a side-by-side comparison. I did the same thing with the Adrenaline data flow. And why I'm talking about this, I'll just kick this off. Why I'm talking about this one. We don't have time for the other one. I only have a few minutes with you guys today, but inside here, I'll show you what the bells and the whistles are. A lot of you are familiar with this because it looks very similar to our SQL or Redshift SQL. But I just took that big data set that we had. I created a couple of summaries, and I'll just product preview a little bit. That you're going to see here is eventually this product will write into other databases. So it'll be something that'll happen in the future here, but it's kind of a little beta feature that's coming along. But right now, it's just in the works. So you'll be able to process those and send those out to other systems in our multi-cloud environments and allow you to have access to that. So I think if we just pop back here, I'm sure it's done by now. Yeah. 50 seconds. So, for you to look back over, 300 or 500 million rows of data every day and process it in 50 seconds, that's kind of nice. And I'm sure that with some of the organizations, you get that many tweets or you get that many Facebook hits that you guys are looking at for your data, and you want to push that out and get results quickly. This will help your marketing teams move and adjust quickly. So that's all I have. I'll pass it back to Andrea.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. I think it's safe to say that Adrenaline Dataflows wins out in the fight in data aggregation or reduction, especially of those really large data sets. Round 2, Dan is up with Dataset Views.
Hey, everyone. Nice to be back with you all. Yeah, so our next contender then is Dataset Views. To get us started off, I want to introduce you to Dataset Views. Dataset Views, I think, are a little bit different than maybe some of our other ETL tools. Different a little bit in the way I think about using them. Let me start off talking about the strengths. So the first and biggest thing is depending on your user, depending on your skill set or background or whatever else, Dataset Views are going to be a great way of performing some relatively lightweight transformations without any kind of, with really minimal kind of background in SQL, or no background in SQL really, right? Because it's presented in a really comfortable data grid kind of Excel-ish interface, right? But it's still got plenty of functionality. So we can join data sets in a view, or we can union or append data sets in a view. You can filter and aggregate, you can sort. There are calculated fields for when you do want to stretch a little bit and maybe use some SQL-like logic. So a fairly robust feature set in a really nice, comfortable, familiar user interface. When I think of maybe some of the common usage patterns, things around like data usability or cleanliness come to mind. So you can do things like rename columns or set data types, handle nulls really nicely, really easily, again, in this comfortable user interface that many of us are familiar with. If I think in terms of, what are views uniquely good at, one of the things that stands out is this idea of like ad hoc real-time data exploration. So that is to say, I don't need to run it through a data flow run my data through a data flow if all I'm trying to do is maybe some validation exercise, right? I'm still in exploration mode. I'm trying to come to understand my data. It can be a little bit clumsy, a little bit clunky if I need to, do some validation or exploration type logic in a data flow and then wait for the data flow to run and then look at the results. With views, you can do that all, again, right there in this comfortable user interface. when I think in terms of how views perform, maybe relative to Magic ETL or some of the other tools we'll talk about today, the big thing to keep in mind with Dataset Views is that the data is not materialized. So what does that mean? Materialized data is saved on a disk somewhere, whereas virtual data, or in this case, view data, is not materialized. Instead, a view is a saved query, right? It's not a saved result set. That's how we're able to do things like that ad hoc data exploration part of this, but it can also come into play as a strength or as a weakness when we think in terms of performance, right? I'll show an example here in a minute of how we can use dataset views sort of optimally for a really performant data pipeline, but we also want to consider that saved view, or that saved query concept when we start talking about really large data or really complex data transformations. So when is maybe views not the right tool? It's those things. I've got very, very large input data sets, especially if I'm trying to do like maybe a relatively more complex join or some complex calculations, right? The reason for that is, again, it's a saved query as opposed to a saved result set. What that means is each time I want to use the view itself is being recalculated. That query is being re-executed, right? So for that reason, we want to consider impact on dashboard loading time, so kind of end user performance there. But again, when the use case is right, views can be a great way to go. The other thing I wanted to point out when views might not be a good solution for you is when you need to do some data transformation, and then you need to do maybe some additional data transformation in some other tool. So views can be used as an input to Magic ETL, but can't be used as an input to, say, MySQL or Redshift or Adrenaline data flows. Okay. Okay, let's just move right ahead then. Well, I've introduced you now to the challenger, and let's see how views stacks up side by side against Magic transformations. So in terms of data, it's going to be similar in terms of ability of views to handle small or medium or large data. What we really want to keep in mind in the back of our mind is, again, performance. And so we can't only consider the size of the data. We need to consider sort of the overall complexity or overall processing intensiveness of the data transformation we're trying to do. So if you're doing a very simple calculation on a very large data set, no problem, views can do that, right? If you're doing a more complex calculation on a small data set, no problem, views can do that. We might get ourselves into trouble, as I said, when we're trying to do a very complex calculation on a very large data set, because that sort of is a heavy lift in terms of the total processing intensiveness of the query. When I consider user personas, so Magic transforms, tons of functionality. Magic is going to scale with you. You can do, the more you learn about data and the more comfortable you get manipulating data, the more you will be able to do with Magic. Views, kind of similar. I'm thinking of it as transformation for all, right? Because anybody that's familiar with working with data in something like Excel is going to be familiar or feel comfortable working with data in Dataset Views. Transforms, I've said, again, views are going to really perform especially well when we're talking about relatively more simple calculations. The goal is one thing that's really worth highlighting. Again, what are the use cases where it makes sense? One that really stands out is this idea of real-time data exploration, right? Let me go searching for some signal in my data that maybe I don't even know to look for yet. I want to summarize my data in lots of different ways. I want to do it quickly. I want to interact with the data in a tabular kind of rows and columns way. Dataset Views is great for that. Whereas Magic transforms, Magic ETL is more about transforming data as part of a larger data pipeline. In terms of outputs, here's the other big highlight or big headline. As with Magic ETL, as with all of Domo's other ETL tools, the output from those tools is materialized. So you've got rows and columns of data stored in a data table on a disk, basically. Whereas with views, again, we've got this idea of the saved query. It's not materialized. I wanted to maybe just present a use case that would help us think about where does where do views fit here, right? So I've got a large data set of sales transactions, and my stakeholders want to see their dashboards updated very quickly with current data, right? The raw data is mostly ready for visualization, just needs a little bit of lightweight transformation before it's ready to visualize. This could be a great use case for Dataset Views. One, because the transformation logic, as I said, is relatively simple, and because timeliness is important. Again, because it's a saved query rather than a materialized output, we can see the results of our transformation very, very quickly because we don't need to wait for a data flow to run. Each time a data flow runs, we're going to ingest data into the data processing engine. We're going to transform it, whatever our business logic is, and then we're going to output the results into a data table. Well, with a view, we're basically eliminating that input and output time, and we can just focus on the transformation. So where timeliness is really key, views can be a good way to go. Again, keep in mind total processing intensiveness of what I'm asking the view to do. If it's extremely intensive, then our end users on their dashboards could start to be impacted by cards taking longer to load because you've got this very complex query that's trying to run. Okay. And then I make a note here that the view can be used for output, or it can be used as input to additional data flows downstream. I want to just show you an example of this very quickly. So here I've got an input data set of almost 100 million rows. I've created a data flow that's just aggregating, and my result is 899 rows. I've done the same logic now in a data set view, and I've got that same 899 views or 899 rows. If I were to update this data, and I'll do this off the screen. So I'm just sending some new data into this raw data set, and as soon as this is done, I'll refresh this page. Okay, so that is almost done. You can see it's now preparing, and we're getting very close. The dangers of a live demo, right? We'll just wait for this to upload this data. And what I'm going to show you here, if I come over to my dashboard, I'm showing a dashboard here. This card is based on my dataset view, and this card is based on my data flow output. You can see they're identical, right? I'm just pushing a fairly large chunk of data into this data set right now, and it's just taking just a moment to do that. I may stop our live demo here. Just in the interest of time, we can circle back to it in just a minute if we'd like, but maybe I'll stop the live demo here. The point I was trying to make is that very quickly, once this finishes the ingest process, very quickly, we're going to see that this view is going to update. Okay, it's now done. Let me just refresh this page. Okay, you can see my updated timestamp of 3:04 p.m. Let me just refresh this now, and I will see that my raw input data has already updated. My view has also already updated. My data flow is still running though, right? So let's go back to our dashboard. I'll refresh this dashboard, and you can see this view is already updated with the latest data. The data flow though is still running, right? Now, again, the point here is we were really focused on timeliness of the data, and that's why views, again, for our relatively lightweight transformation, where timeliness is really key, views is a good way to go. Got back over to you, Andrea.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, so for that timeliness on lightweight transformations, also, as you mentioned earlier, turning a business user loose on a dataset view is likely to succeed a lot better than turning a business user loose on a Magic ETL or a SQL data flow or something along those lines. So I think, again, that round was won by dataset views. So I am going to present. Here we go. I'm going to do my own presentation here. And I am representing SQL data flows. This probably seems a little bit odd for me, being that I have a reputation for beating down SQL data flows in favor of Magic. I will tell you, I personally do actually enjoy writing SQL, and I do actually find a use case for our SQL data flows, on a fairly regular basis. So, okay, let's think about SQL. Um, Here are a few things that I think that they're strong for. Probably first and foremost is non-equijoins. So when you need to join on an inequality or on a range of values, every time it's going to be easier and more elegant in a SQL data flow. Um, Number two, the ability to write stored procedures or functions is better in SQL data flows. You can maybe do some of these, using Python tiles or whatever in Magic, but a lot of cases when you need to write that type of item, you're going to want to do it in a SQL data flow. And finally, they're kind of just universal. I have a lot of people say, oh, that's an awful lot of clicking around just to write, a single line of code or whatever. If you're in Magic, using 10 tiles to write, a line or two worth of SQL. SQL is widely known, widely used. We don't hire like anybody technically at Domo who can't write SQL, right? So SQL is a kind of universal language, and it can be much more elegant to represent something in SQL. As far as special skills required to use it, though, you're looking for somebody who's an analyst who writes SQL, so it's kind of a barrier to entry there to the SQL data flows. Performance-wise, they're slower. Admittedly, they'll take longer to execute than Magic in almost every case, and it can be unpredictable, especially the load and the write-back times are unpredictable in SQL data flows. Where is it not the right tool? I mean, a lot of times I would push you back to Magic. Most transformation tasks I would push you into Magic. However, talking about, a few things you might not know about SQL data flows is that you can create stored procedures in MySQL, not in Redshift. Conversely, you can use windowing functions in Redshift, but not MySQL. Before anybody asks, we're not upgrading MySQL to the next version. And finally, all of the rows in a SQL data flow, you can load them all so that you can do validation in your previews prior to running it. Currently in Magic, you're capped at the number of rows you can read in. So sometimes customers want to be able to do validation on the logic that they're writing while they're writing their data flow, and it is, better within SQL than within Magic in that regard. So looking at this comparison here, as far as data size, Magic, you're going to be able to use it on basically any size of data until you're maybe breaching just some really large numbers. SQL data flows, you're going to notice them choking, at the medium, tens of millions of rows, into hundreds of millions, you're getting into hours and hours. The level of user, Magic, they don't have to be coders. SQL, you probably need a SQL analyst or an analyst who writes SQL. Transforms, Magic does have a robust feature set. Our SQL data flows have basically all the SQL functions available that you would be accustomed to using in most SQL environments. Joins, Magic can only really do those equijoins where columns equal each other, whereas when SQL data flows, you can use all different types of joins there. Magic has a really fast query handler, SQL slower and less predictable. However, let's talk about a use case. So let's say I'm the director of a large hotel chain, and I need to be able to see what the booking rate is at my properties on any given day. I have access to a data set that shows all of my bookings, that shows me the property, what the room number is, the dates, any customer information, etc. How can I get this daily rate? In Magic, the first thing you're going to do, you're going to go in, you're going to look at your join and say, oh no, where's between? How do I say I want something between a certain, it's like columns that have dates in them? I mean, frankly, you can't do it in Magic. So the solution being, you create a Cartesian product between the tables after you, create the join key that you can join onto that Cartesian, then you filter to the relevant rows. It works most of the time. It's messy. It's computationally intensive because you're blowing out your data. If you have big data sets to begin with, creating that Cartesian between them is just going to be not feasible in some cases. So, you move to SQL like, oh, yes, this is what I'm used to. This makes sense to me. You obviously join the hotel bookings data to the calendar, where calendars between, booking date and start dates, single line of code for this join condition. You're not creating any Cartesians. Life is happy. So in summary, for the most part, the data flows, the SQL data flows are not ones that I would push you toward using. However, for those use cases where you need very specific SQL functions or you need to be able to make those non-equi joins, a couple other things that I mentioned, I think SQL does win the day for those. So wrapping it up in summary, Dan?
Yeah, I think that the summary really is, I joke, it's the answer to the question is always, it depends. It seems like in these things, right? And it's like the least satisfying answer, and yet it's the most appropriate. So if the question is which data transformation tool should I use, the answer is it depends, right? Now that being said, I've been here at Domo almost 5 years. I came from like a SQL developer background, and when I came here, I thought, you know what, I'm part of the Domo team. I'm going to force myself to learn Magic ETL, and I did, and it was fine. But I still use SQL data flows quite a bit. The longer I've been here, Magic ETL has improved significantly over the last couple of years. And by the way, add in this capability for subset processing and partitioning, and the doors are wide open for what you can do with Magic ETL. So anyway, sorry, getting back to it. I came from a SQL background. I find myself using Magic ETL more and more and more. That being said, each of the four of us identified instances where one of these other tools is maybe more preferred, right? In general, my approach is I kind of start with the de facto Magic ETL as my tool of choice, and then I move away from it when a specific use case really calls for it. So Adrenaline data flows, really massive input data, and I'm either filtering or aggregating such that my output is much smaller. Views Explorer, maybe really quick timeliness and relatively simple data transformation. And then SQL data flows, the example that Andrea gave is the one I oftentimes think of when I want to perform a join, a non-equi join, and that's just much easier in SQL data flows. But yeah, the short answer to the question to which ETL tool do I prefer? The short answer is it depends. That said, I typically start with Magic.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
Eddie, to you.
Yeah, thank you. You guys, as always, Andrea, she brings so much rock star power to the Lunch and Learns, and then this time she brought an entire team with her. So we love to have you guys on again. I love this idea of a little bit of pitting the tools against each other, but there are very specific use cases for each one of these instances that definitely warrants the use, right? So, or the solution that you might have. So I love that you guys were able to overview that. We had tons of viewership, obviously near the end here, and a few people sticking around. So if you have questions, now's the time, as I tend to fill a little bit of time as we're waiting if anybody has any future questions for Nick, Matt, Dan, or Andrea. But I also wanted to shout out and give a little promotion to our upcoming community-wide virtual meetup. If you haven't checked out our community virtual meetups, they're at our community events page, which I will link in the chat toward the comment section down below if you're watching on demand. We will have the data science team on April 20th. So super excited to provide that. And again, I'll link that. I'll link the registration to that event at the bottom with the comments in the chat. As always, guys, no questions coming in, which means you did a fantastic job. So I really appreciate part of the Lunch and Learns. This was Magic ETL versus the Contenders. Watch it on demand. Share it with your network. Appreciate you guys being a part. Thanks again for being with us. Until next time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Eddie. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.